art and image making can allow us then to access things that don't have the filter or defense of language. If you read a psalm and you were to draw or paint inspiration from that psalm, you are meditating on and only thinking about that scripture the entire time that you are creating. It's so hard to just sit and think or focus, our mind wanders, but if we're creating art about it, that is all that we're thinking about.
Welcome to Design for More, sponsored by Come and Reason Ministries and Honey Lake Clinic. I'm Dr. Tim Jennings and joined again today by Danielle Rome, our art therapist here at Honey Lake Clinic. And we're picking up from our last show, this is part 2, on art and
Health in the 4 domains.
Art and health in the 4 domains. Yes, so we're talking about art and how art is important in our mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual health. So I know we just finished talking about that case and that painting. Where are we going to go from here?
So I would love to just jump right into a definition of art therapy.
Okay, do it.
What even is art therapy? So we talked about kind of what the Bible says about creativity and God's design for art and designers and craftsmen. And kind of this dance that we do with God of creating. So bringing this into a therapeutic context, I like to break art therapy into 2 main categories. The first is making what's internal external. So this can look like the creation of images and symbols. So when we're born into the world, we don't have capacity for language, right? We experience things in images and sensations. And that's how we make sense of our surroundings. We make sense of, how I get food, how I get whatever I need, right? And as you get older and your cortex develops, you start to understand language and put words to things. We have memories, experiences, and feelings that exist pre-verbally, is what we call it. So the use of art making actually engages with pre-verbal memory and experience. I'll pause there because you look like you're thinking hard about something.
So you said that as an absolute, not as a possibility. You didn't say art therapy can engage. You said it does engage.
Yes.
So I'm going to question that, because if it's an absolute, then that means it's doing it all the time, and that all of our art is only pre-verbal.
I mean, art inherently, imagery, creating imagery.
But pre-verbal means basically before the age of 14, 18 months. So that means no art happens from inspiration after 18 to 14 months, all pre-verbal. No, I don't. I reject that. I'm going to reject that art can tap into pre-verbal, emotions and or experiences, but it can tap into many things we've learned since then.
Well, even as adults, we experience things that we aren't even cognitively aware
I
of that
understand
exist in a pre-verbal
No, so when you say
space.
pre-verbal, I'm hearing it as before
Development.
14 months
Okay.
of age,
Okay.
not nonverbal.
Okay. What I'm
And if you mean nonverbal from the other aspects of our, right hemisphere, where we're experiencing the world around us, that's nonverbal, but that's not pre-verbal.
okay, then we can use that terminology.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. So do you understand the difference that I just clarified?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would agree with that.
Okay. So nonverbal. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Then I'm totally on board with you.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So art and image making can allow us then to access things that don't have the filter or defense of language.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So when we communicate anything, so me talking right now, I have concepts and I'm putting words to those concepts to communicate them with you. I could be speaking in another language right now, right, to do those same concepts, but regardless of the words that I'm putting to them, the concepts exist before that language.
Exactly. No, exactly correct.
Yeah.
Words are symbols of
Yes.
concepts or realities. For instance, the letters TREE is not a tree.
Right.
And you cannot get nutrition and health from reading the words apple, walnuts, and avocados.
Yes.
Those are symbolic representations that we call language or words, and all the languages of the world have their own symbolic representations of this.
Yes.
But they're not the realities themselves. And so,
Right.
Art can use other symbols. Hieroglyphics is a form of language that uses imagery more than it does letters.
Yep.
But it's still symbolic representations. Right? So if this is what you're
Right.
getting to,
Yes.
then
And the argument is that art and image making allows things to exist in the space closer to how they exist in our mind than words.
Well, I'm going to suggest that, in fact, the art and imagery making may represent things coming out of our right hemisphere more
Okay.
than out of our left hemisphere.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, because I wouldn't want to suggest that our left hemisphere doesn't represent things that exist in our mind,
Yeah, absolutely.
and,
Yeah.
and only the right hemisphere does.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so our left hemisphere seeks to make sense of what's happening in the right hemisphere.
Yes.
Right. And so we can do that through language and therapy. But something that can get in the way is maybe we don't even know what words to put to what's happening. Or,
But isn't even what you were saying,
yeah.
the purpose of art is to bring the content in our right hemisphere into awareness so our left hemisphere can process and understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we can do that in talk therapy, but there are certain situations where that gets blocked.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So the benefit of art making is we can put things out as they exist or closer to, I would argue, the way that they exist in our right hemisphere so that then we can talk about it.
Yeah, I like
Because
it.
when it's just a thought or it's a concept, it can be fleeting, right? We cannot remember what we were talking about.
Or rationalized,
We can rationalize.
distorted.
We can distort it, yes. But once it's out here in the physical space, I can't say, oh no, I didn't draw that.
Yeah.
I drew it. It's there. We can't argue with it.
Yeah.
We can talk
Understand
about
it.
what it means.
Yeah.
We can process it. But once it's in the physical world, I've brought it into the physical world. We can't argue with the fact that it came out of my mind and is now in front of us.
Yeah.
And so making something that can be so fleeting, more concrete, can allow us to then
So what do you do to the
process it.
patient who, because I get where you're going with that.
Yes.
These are the patients that are having struggles. You have some sense of what it is. They are denial, or they are constantly moving off of the issue to some other distraction of some other element in their life because they don't want to focus on that issue. And
Yep.
so you use art therapy that actually puts something on paper that is representative of the struggle.
Mhm.
And as you point to it, they do the exact same thing. Well, that doesn't mean that. That means this. And yes, of course, I put that down there because it means this, and it doesn't mean that. They're rationalizing the art.
Yep.
What do you do with that?
Well, it's similar to, you can't argue with reality. You can't argue with what's real.
Yeah, but it's all about interpretation. You're trying to interpret it one way.
With symbols, yes.
Yes.
With symbols, yes. But for example, and in a second, I'll show some examples of an assessment that we do. Okay, sure, we can argue with what it means, but look how long it took you to draw a single line. Look how few colors you used. Look how little space you used. You were slow. You were, the energy in which you created this is undeniable. We can't argue with that. So we can at least start with something we can agree on
I
and then
like where you're
continue to
going.
make sense of it.
And I
from
like
there.
this conversation because in our example that ended our previous episode, art was used there to activate neural pathways
Yes.
and develop skills
Yes.
without interpretation.
Correct.
In other words, we weren't having them bring stuff out of their mind to interpret. We were
Right.
having them paint something they saw.
Yes.
But it was the exercise of the doing the art that developed attention, focus, concentration,
Yes.
patience, had to wait for things to dry, all these other elements, and anticipation. Lots of healthy prefrontal cortex development was going on through this art therapy that helped the addict learn self-mastery skills that he needs to control impulses and so forth. So that art therapy was doing something neurocognitively and characterologically and I just want our audience to understand, we've shifted the focus. Well, the purpose of this art therapy is not to develop those skills.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
The purpose of this therapy is to discover or bring out into the open unconscious or perhaps maybe preconscious avoided stuff
Yes.
that is uncomfortable, that needs to be resolved, healed, addressed.
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
fair in saying
Yes,
this?
absolutely.
Okay.
And so I'll go ahead and, first let me bring actually a verse into this. Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made from things that are visible." So even in creation, it's made physical, made tangible, the character of God. So I want to
Right.
draw
From
that
the mind
connection
of
as well.
God
Yes.
comes his creation.
Yes. And
Yes.
then we can understand more about the mind and character of God by
Mm-hmm.
looking at what he
Yeah, the heavens
created.
declare the glory of God.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to bring that
Yeah,
connection
I like
because
it.
that connects us back into how we were created. This
Mm-hmm.
process is how God created us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something art therapists made up.
Right, right. No, so like I said in another show, and Jesus said, "From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks."
Yes.
Okay, so people bring out of them what's in them,
Yep.
whether it's good, evil, or whatever. Whatever comes out is a representation of what's in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that. I don't have any verses here, but in the creation of idols as well.
Yes.
Is it physical creation, but representative of what was going on in the heart?
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So I have some examples here.
Yeah. Do it. Yeah.
And we'll have it on the screen for the viewer, but I'll go ahead and show you. I just want to know, what do you see? So let me first tell you the prompt. So this is a pretty common assessment that we give to clients, and it's called the bridge drawing. And essentially, they are given the instruction, draw a bridge from one place to another place.
And this was a representative of what a patient might draw.
Yes. So
And we're trying to learn
Yep.
basically something about and the
Yes.
instruction is simply draw a bridge from one place to another.
Yes.
And they draw the bridge, they draw the place.
Yes. And so just kind of a side note, when it comes to artwork made by clients or patients, we actually see that as really valuable and private. So there's a lot of structure and ethics and guidelines put around protecting the artwork of patients that they make because it's so vulnerable. So this is
Representative of that.
This is representative. This is including elements of what I have actually had people I've worked with
I
create
understand.
in order to draw. So I want to clarify that for viewers. And for any people that are watching this that have worked with me, I am not going to just show your artwork to the world.
Yeah. No, of course not. So you're
What do you see?
asking me
Yep.
what I might intuit from this or consider the patient is revealing about themselves from this.
Yep. So I want to
Okay.
know what you see, and then I'll give some context.
Yeah. So just from the one place to another, I'm going to assume that one place is where they are. That's where they're starting. That's their life, a stormy life with dark clouds and lightning bolts and rain and darkness over here with the three objects. A rickety, not very strong, fragile over a large chasm
Yes.
with ragged rocks and threats below. And so it's very dangerous to make the move across the bridge. It's safer to stay in the storms of life that they know.
Yeah.
So that's what I would interpret.
Yeah, absolutely. So some things that we think about with this assessment. So with this assessment and with many art therapy assessments is kind of a systematic questions and observations that we make. And when we do it systematically, it allows us to see more parts of it rather than just projecting our own interpretation of the symbols. So specifically, we might ask, where's the most attention and time given? What has the most detail? The past. What has the least? The future. There is nothing over here. The person in this image, the person that created this image, does not see a future for themselves. This is indication of suicidality. This is an indication of hopelessness, an indication of helplessness. And so in this example, what this is kind of inspired from is the person is then asked at the end, put a dot where you are, or tell me where you are in this image. And this person said that they are in one of the tombstones.
I didn't know what those were. I thought maybe they were people, just they couldn't draw very well.
Yeah. Skill.
Yeah.
And that's why you ask the person to interpret.
Yeah. What are those three
tell
things?
me about this image.
Me, my brother, and
Yes.
sister.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so,
But they're tombstones. That's even
they're tombstones.
that
Yep.
actually adds color to the interpretation. Then
yes. So some context. This is inspired by a 16-year-old suffering from depression, suicidality, self-harm, and difficulties with social connection after COVID. And so these tombstones represent to them the death of fundamental social experiences that they feel like they fundamentally missed out on in life. And they feel that part of them has died with those
Yeah, I'm going
things.
to say it had to be more
Yes.
than something lost in society. It had to be connected to them,
Yes.
or it really doesn't have. I mean, they got rid of rotary phones from society,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's not
Exactly.
something lost from
Something
society unless it's
personal.
connected to your personal story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so,
So we would
yep.
trace then.
And noticing the energy.
Yeah.
Where is that there is low energy here. So if this is up on the screen, the viewer could see that if you have art experience yourself or drawing experience, you could see that these lines took a very long time to draw. You can see parts where the marker sat for longer periods of time when the person was drawing. So you can see the energy exhibited, the use of color. The only space where there's any bright color is in these lightning bolts up here. There's something higher above them that they see as oppressive. Perhaps they see
Threatening.
God as threatening and oppressive,
Mm-hmm.
and they see the future as empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that.
So you can see a lot in this very assessment. And this is an assessment that's used very often at the beginning and then again at the end of treatment to see what has
See if
changed.
they have a future drawn, see if their
Yep.
unconscious world changes. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so let's see. And you pointed out the strength of the bridge. That's something that we look at a lot as well. And what are they afraid of? What's under the bridge is what they're trying to avoid.
And the chasm length
Yes.
looks like a long, rather than a little short little bridge.
Yep. And also how much space is taken up in the image.
Mhm.
There is so much empty space here, which there's so little. There's a defeat. There's a you can feel that when you look at it.
Mhm.
Okay, so you notice how when we went through that systematic process, we saw more than
Yeah.
maybe just
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
initial
I liked it.
application.
Yeah.
So this is inspired by that same person at the end of treatment.
Yeah. No, much different picture.
So what do you see?
Yeah. You see a bridge that is actually robust and strong.
Yep.
You see instead of threatening death under the bridge, you actually see perhaps a playground, a stream you could play in.
Yeah.
Okay. You see the 3 tombstones that hit society, but now you don't see lightning bolts anymore, and you see some rain. You also see sunshine in the future. You see a home back there. So even though things are happening in society, she has a safe place and a home. And across the bridge into the future, there's lots of flowers and greenery and color and 2 homes and 3 homes and trees and multiple paths, multiple options into the future, because a path with multiple options, and the sun is shining in the future.
Yep, exactly. And for her, these 3 houses were symbolic of this is the community that she wants to develop. So at the point of creating this, she still was very isolated. She was still struggling socially, but she was learning new skills and had hope in developing the community that she knew she needed for her own health. So at the point of creating this, she still has stuff to work through.
Yeah,
You can see certain things in here, like, maybe you see this stream as playful, but to me, I see it more as a waterfall.
Oh, it's not a stream, it's a waterfall.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my own interpretation.
Yeah,
And
we
so
didn't
that's
ask
what
her.
I would ask,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I would ask. And so for me, the viewer, I don't want to assign meaning to it. I want to
Yeah.
ask
Right,
during
right,
that
right, right.
conversation.
And you're not dependent upon their art skill to know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's what was there the most attention to? There is way more detail in the future than the past, but the past is not being ignored. So there was a patient I was working with that I did this for who was just diagnosed with a terminal illness. And contrary to what you might assume, it was actually quite the opposite, where they had all of the focus on the future and nothing on the past, nothing in the bridge. Very
There's all
empty.
hope about
It was denial,
denial of.
complete denial of the diagnosis.
Okay, so it wasn't a heavenly future.
No,
It wasn't an earthly
Nope.
new future, where a Christian might do
Nope.
that, looking forward.
it was, I just know that I'm going to be healed. This
Ah.
is all going to go away.
Gotcha.
And my family and I are going to go move to the beach and all of these things.
Yeah.
And it was complete denial of the diagnosis. And so you could see that in the lack of balance overall in the image, the too much emphasis on the future.
Yeah. No, this is great. This is very helpful in helping
Mhm.
uncover some of those obstacles that
Yep.
are impairing their wellness.
Yes.
You got Keep going. Keep going. I have
Yeah.
questions, but I might be getting ahead of you, so I want you to progress at your pace.
Well, I mean, I'll actually stop here with interpretation of this. I'm wondering what you have to say.
No, no, I was just going to say, do you have more interpretation to show us? Or my question was after you have somebody like the person in denial or this person who
Hmm.
did this at the beginning, the end of therapy,
Yep.
do you use different art therapy to help them either address their denial or
Yes.
to be able to change their internal perspectives and process so they can actually have a hope in the future?
Yes. So this is an example of an assessment.
This is
So we
assessment
might
art.
use
Yes.
this
Hmm.
just to assess.
Right.
Um, but I've personally I've taken it further in some cases. So there was another person I was working with who had just been diagnosed with. Well, she had terminal cancer. Was kind of in a place of acceptance about it. Um, she put heaven as the future, and she put her life on earth as the past, and she put plenty of detail in both. It was very hopeful, grounded, took up space, but the bridge was just a line. So she was so uncertain and anxious about what was going to happen next. How was this journey going to turn out for her? She had a lot of fear and uncertainty, and
About the dying process,
yes, and when
which is very common.
we talked about it further, she said specifically she's had a really hard time trusting God, which makes sense. It's very common for that kind of experience. And so what I challenged her to do was reinforce the bridge. I left it a
Hmm.
very simple direction. And I
Hmm.
said, what would this bridge look like if it was stronger? And I just gave her space to do that. And this was in a larger group,
Hmm.
not an individual person I was working with. So I didn't get to entirely follow up with her. But I saw her again a year later, and she was actually recovering. And she said that that was a pivotal moment for her where the act of creating a reinforcement created a feeling of strength, a symbol of strength that she then started to apply to God.
Now, I'm actually, what you just said has stimulated my mind to inquire.
Hmm.
Are you aware in your art studies of any corresponding functional brain imagery that happens to look neurobiologically at the time a patient like that is reinforcing, not which motor circuits are moving,
Right.
but do we see activation of certain like anterior cingulate cortex
Yes.
or whatever
Yes.
that and or activity in the corpus callosum, which is signaling left and right hemisphere activity together.
Yes.
Are we seeing that the act of drawing that helps neurobiologic substrate in a way that brings balance and healing?
Yes. So there's a lot of research currently being done on neuroscience and art therapy. That's where we're getting into some of the limitations of my current understanding and something that I'm going to be learning more about in the upcoming
Hmm.
months.
Hmm.
So I don't have a lot to share with that specifically, but I am aware of their
So
many
I would be very interested
studies. Yes.
to know, when she drew that bridge.
What happened
Well,
internally?
no. Well, first off, was that sense of emotional confidence at the time she was drawing, or did she draw it and then contemplate it? And over the course of days, she got that confidence. I would be interested to ask that
I would
question.
also be
Do
interested.
you know the
Yeah.
answer?
I don't. And
Yeah.
again, she wasn't my
Yeah, what? Yeah, yeah. I'd be
patient,
interested,
but
and then if it
yeah.
was at the time she was drawing it, which I allow for the possibility because epiphanies, awarenesses that can happen,
Yes.
changes in perspectives
Yes.
can have immediate neurobiological
Yes.
change.
I will say she did tell me she put it on her wall. She put it
Okay,
on her wall and had it there the entire rest of the year through her
nice, nice.
process to look at.
And
Yep.
I will tell you also, this is an aside, but I've seen research on cognitive therapy in patients with various cancers, and they compare the gene expression. This is not now neurobiological activation. This is which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off.
Mm-hmm.
Gene expression in the group that is getting the cognitive therapy and the control group. And what they discover is the group that is getting the cognitive therapy actually has alteration in gene expression that turns on cancer-fighting genes. And
Wow.
so the group has and reduced inflammatory genes.
Wow.
So they actually have a better longevity
Yep.
than the group that didn't get them. I suspect that what you described in this individual that it shifted the discouragement and the fear to hope would have caused an epigenetic modification that improved her immune system and improved outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me. I'll get into that when I talk about
Uh,
how art therapy can help in the domain of body health as
All right,
well.
let's keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just reviewed the first part of art therapy of making the internal external, right? We see that through assessment. And we already kind of started talking about the other category that I break things into, which is making the external internal, right? How the things we do in the physical world using art can affect us internally as well. Um, and so this leads me into how there's actually been a lot of, and this is similar to the question you asked, there have been a lot of studies on how different art materials, different art therapy processes can actually influence different neurological processes as well through activation of different parts of the brain um, and things like that. So I actually did bring a book with me today. So the model that we use in art therapy for this is called the Expressive Therapies Continuum. I have a book here if anybody's interested. It's Expressive Therapies Continuum, a framework for using art in therapy by Lisa Hines.
Okay.
She's somebody that has done a lot of research in this and
Okay.
has written really great work. So essentially, the Expressive Therapies Continuum describes 3 levels of human neurological development, mirrored in the way we see neurological development in children and their engagement with art. So, for example, the lowest level would be more kinesthetic and sensory processes,
So,
right?
say that so our audience that doesn't know what does kinesthetic sensory mean?
Yeah. So, sensory is the engagement with different senses. So, this can be something like finger painting,
Okay.
right? Or kinesthetic is something that is more energy. So, it can be breaking something even. Um, So this can be helpful in therapy. For example, if somebody is really, really stuck and disconnected from um, either expressing their emotions, connecting with their emotions, childhood memories and experiences, they're kind of stuck at a more cognitive level and they're not really able to engage with those
So you're talking
levels.
about the mediums now? Is that what you're
Yes.
talking about? So a person might do better therapeutically with um, sculpting tools to break things, or clay where they can smash the clay down and mash it in their hands versus
So
a
it's a
pencil or something. Is that what you're trying to describe
kind
here?
of, yeah.
Yeah.
So, art therapists are trained using this model in order to create a therapeutic process that actually leads someone through multiple steps
Hmm.
that doesn't end there. It
Okay.
doesn't end in disintegration. It ends in greater integration, maturity, and higher levels of
No, no,
development.
no. I wasn't talking about disintegration of the self. I
Yep.
was talking about the that they might have a lot of anger or something, so they want to break something to process and get into that or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes. And that's where we have to be careful because we don't end there. So, for example, people talk about what's it called? The smash rooms,
Yeah,
the rooms where people go
yeah,
break
yeah.
things. That can be cathartic, but it can also keep somebody in a space where they're not actually making anything out of their problem. They're just staying angry, they're staying destructive. And so, for example, I might have somebody break something as part of an art therapy directive, but I don't have them break it and then just leave the office. Um,
Now I've seen collages where they can break something and then make it into a collage of some type of art.
right. So, and that's connects to the expressive therapies continuum. So, moving forward with the other 2 levels, the second level is, I won't get into all of the technical terms
Sure.
of it, but essentially it's a higher level of development, the ability to make shapes,
Okay.
engage in emotions.
Yeah.
And then the highest level is cognitive. So critical thinking, understanding multiple steps, carefully thinking about something and following through and making it, as well as symbolism, which is the combination of a cognitive understanding and an emotional understanding and
Gotcha.
making symbolic meaning of something.
Gotcha.
So art therapists will use this system of the expressive therapies continuum and how different materials and processes fall in these different levels to actually put something together with multiple steps to lead somebody up through. Maybe you have to knock them down a little bit, but then build them back up to
So the art
higher
therapy
level of functioning.
can be used diagnostically, and
Yes.
then it can be used therapeutically to help them get into and begin processing their stuff. And
Yes.
then it can be used as a tool to help them organize their stuff and kind of rebuild in an object lesson way. The art itself is not doing the rebuilding.
Yes.
Okay, the art is a medium that gets them thinking and processing and working, and as in that example that we did in the last session, it can also have the neurobiological benefit of attention, focus, concentration, and organization, and all those elements that go along.
Well, there are brain scans that show how different materials, so for example, more fluid paints that are harder to control with maybe a big paintbrush or something, can activate more right brain, limbic, kind of emotional processes. We're using something more controlled, like drawing with a graphite pencil, doesn't really activate that part of the brain as much as it does the cortex.
Hmm.
So you can literally encourage the activation of different parts of the brain based on materials that you're instructing
Hmm.
somebody to
Hmm.
use.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. No, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, you are actually causing certain things to happen. And that's part of, we mentioned it briefly in the last episode, but art can be
Yeah.
dangerous if
Yeah.
it's misused.
Yeah. So, but you're not saying that just doing art unguided will heal. Anybody can just go take an art
Can.
class at college and get well.
Um, I don't know. So I don't think it's that
You're
black
undermining
and
your
white.
profession if you are.
No. Well, I'm saying that it's not. So if God if God,
no. Hear my question. Don't read into it what I didn't ask.
okay.
I said you're not saying that just doing art at an art college can heal.
I think in some cases, depending on what the person's illness or problem is, that can be very healing for some people. Not everybody needs this complex of a process. So what we've learned about what it does, skill building, stuff
Yeah,
like that.
I would have answered that as it can help them grow and develop.
Okay.
Okay, it
Sure.
can help
Yeah.
them grow and develop. But what you're describing and the problems that you're describing here, um, it doesn't seem to me that the art mechanism itself is what actually heals these types of wounds.
Mm,
The art mechanism itself can by itself, without guidance, if they actually do art, develop attention, focus, concentration, because and other aspects of creativity, because those are all required to do the work, and that's the law of exertion. But to the degree there's unconscious pathology,
then yes.
I think it requires a trained therapist to
Yes.
help guide them through what the art is bringing out to healthy resolution. I don't think it's going to be resolved simply because they do art. That's my bias. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not an art therapist, so you can shoot me down completely and say that's crazy.
Well,
And
what you're getting on is where we differentiate between art therapy and therapeutic art making. So somebody on their own can engage in therapeutic art making.
yeah,
They can
okay,
look at
I'm
a
with you.
YouTube video, follow a specific process, whatever, pray.
Eh,
I'm going to talk about use of art with prayer and time with God.
Yes,
And the
yes, I'm with you
spirit
now.
can lead us through
Okay,
processes that are healing.
and this is often very common in grief. Grief people will do therapeutic art making, and it's very therapeutic and it helps them work through their grief.
Yep.
Okay,
But it's not art therapy.
but it's not art therapy.
Correct.
And there are many because grief is a normal, natural human process,
Yes.
and it can be resolved without a professional therapist
Yes.
through a variety of mechanisms, and art can be one of them.
Yep.
So I think that would
Yes.
be a place where we're in agreement. But to the degree there's actual serious pathology, the art is the tool used in the hands of a skilled professional
Yes.
to help bring the healing. And ultimately, healing will require some aspect of reprocessing.
Absolutely.
Isn't that true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not
So,
just expression.
yeah. And I'm really glad you brought up that differentiation. You can think about that with talk therapy too. A healthy friend, right? A
Yeah.
healthy relationship
Yes.
can be very healing, but that's not therapy.
Yeah.
right? And so there is a difference there.
Yeah.
So I'm glad
Okay.
you brought that up. So an example of kind of this whole complete process, I had somebody who was really, really disconnected from their emotions. They were like, all I have connection to is anger, but I want to cry. I want to express. I want to talk about these things and be vulnerable, but I don't know what my block is. So what I did was something very sensory, something that was a lower level of development, something that unlocked something that was younger. Um, and so we talked about it. We agreed upon it ahead of time. This is a very common art therapy directive, and it's mask making with wet plaster bandages
Okay.
on someone's face.
So they're
So
making their own on their own face?
I'm making it on their face.
Oh. How is that art for them?
So it's a process. So this is where we're taking them through the expressive therapies continuum. So it starts with there's a vulnerability, right? You're kind of exposed. Your face is covered in Vaseline so that it doesn't pull on your eyelashes and eyebrows. And then the therapist puts wet plaster
Yeah,
bandages
I hear you.
on your face. And then you have to sit there and you can't talk for 15 minutes while it dries. That's very vulnerable. And so we talked through this. We set up, if you get uncomfortable, we can, take this off. It's not actually stuck or attached, whatever, right? So we went through this process. After we pulled the mask off, she just started crying. It connected her to that vulnerability, that sensation was enough to
Interesting. Because
break.
I actually wouldn't call that art therapy.
Well, the process isn't over.
Okay.
That
But,
wasn't
but
the end of it.
so far, I see the therapeutic tool, but I wouldn't have called that art therapy. I would have called that something else. But keep going.
Well, it's part of the process. So
Okay.
this is a very common art
Yeah.
therapy
Yeah.
directive. So next, we weren't going to end there,
Yeah.
right? Because
Okay.
if
Yeah.
we ended there, okay, great, I just made her cry, and then
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
right? So we needed to integrate it, and part of integrating it is bringing her up to a higher level of developmental
Process.
process.
Yeah.
So as it dried, I then gave her the materials, and she was able to build up intentionally parts of the mask that she wanted to make stronger, more secure, more even, more
Okay.
symmetrical.
Now I'm into
And
art therapy
then
with you.
and then using scissors, she was able to carefully and intentionally smooth out edges, make
Mm-hmm.
the edges more
Or cut
symmetrical,
away the.
cut away. Yeah, exactly. Cut it
Yeah.
away,
Yeah. And as
take
very
control.
cathartic and symbolic representations there. So
Yep.
I like it. Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
after it dried, I had her, so this is cognitive here, right? So we're at the cognitive level. We're not at
Mm-hmm.
symbolic yet. There is some symbolism in it, but we're not applying
Yeah.
symbolism
Yeah.
yet. And then the final step was to paint the outside and how people see her, what people see, what she projects to
Mm.
people. And the inside is how she is internally.
Oh, I like that a
And
lot.
so the use of paint there was a little bit more of we call it more of a fluid medium, which is a little bit more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And so that integrated affective or emotional process with cognitive, making it symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end, she had just gone through this whole process where she let down the walls, she felt vulnerable, she cried, she took control over it. She
Mm-hmm.
made it the way she wanted it to be. And she realized that when she was younger, she was taught to hide her emotions.
Mm.
And she chose to continue building up that
Mm-hmm.
mask on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And now seeing in front of her who she was on the inside that she was hiding versus how the mask that she had been taught to build, she now had the ability to choose to take that off. After that point, there was a marked difference in the way that she communicated with me, the way she connected with her emotions
Yeah.
during
No, I like
therapy,
this.
in between therapy. It was really significant.
No, I can see how that process, the way you walked all the way through the whole
Mhm.
journey, does help make neurobiologic connections to allow opening up of memory gates and emotion gates for connections to be made. I think that's wonderful.
Yep.
I do have a question though about
Yes.
this particular exercise, because you said they paint at one stage they paint the mask, the outside what they believe other people see them to be, and the inside who they see themselves to be. If I
Yep.
heard you correctly.
Yes.
What do you do for the person who really, really is terrible at art and they don't want to paint an ugly thing on the inside? They don't see themselves ugly, but And so they don't even want to paint it because they see themselves more beautiful than they can possibly do with their skill.
Well, isn't that so revealing of how they probably see other parts of their life?
No, I don't think it is at all. I'm wondering. I think
Well,
there are
that's a
because,
judgment. That's a strong judgment that
but I
they're
mean,
putting on themselves. It's okay, my standards that I've internalized of beautiful art are now affecting my ability to express
but you
myself.
asked you asked the person to paint how they see themselves.
Mhm.
Okay, so the way they see themselves, they might not be able to translate actually into external art. Is my point.
Let
They
me
may not have
process
this.
that. What are the emotions that come from that when they try to create that but can't?
Okay,
How
okay.
does that come
No,
out in
I
other
see how that
areas
could be
where they can't
therapeutic.
express
So
themselves?
yeah,
Yeah.
so I see how that could be therapeutic. But
Mhm.
so in other words, it's not it is not dependent upon how well they can actually do the art
No.
to get onto the medium what they see themselves to be.
Yep.
So if they paint a really ugly, something ugly, you have to inquire, was that purposeful? Well, no, I was actually trying to do this, but I couldn't get it done.
Well, here's what's interesting is I actually really haven't even seen that. People that think like people will say, "Oh, I know this is ugly, but I like it."
Okay.
And so I've seen people be frozen in fear, and I will intentionally give them a big paintbrush where they can't paint well, no matter
Okay.
how well they try.
Okay. I
And
got you. So they're
at the
basically just
end,
pasting some broad strokes.
at the end, they're like, "Yeah, this is messy, but I I made this."
Yes, and it represents so with the big brush, the expectation is not that they actually paint what they see themselves to be in detail. It is that they are making a distinction psychologically, and they're separating who they actually are from the false image they've been maybe
Yes.
projecting.
Yes.
Okay, I
And
got
that's
you. I
and
got
the
you.
the
I
big
like it.
paint the big paintbrush thing is something I personally do. I frequently will make somebody
Yeah.
who's nervous about making art
Yeah, that makes
use
it
a
easy.
material
Then
that's
it's yeah,
impossible to make
perfect,
look great. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
But not every art therapist does that. That's more of a intentional choice that I make. So before we get into art making and its health in the four domains, do you have anything
Well,
else to add on that?
we're already
We're
gone
already at the end of our
we're
time.
already got 3/4 of an hour.
Oh
We've already
no.
gone 3/4 of an hour again, and
Well, I can go through
yeah.
it really
Okay,
quickly.
let's try to. And it's my fault. I keep asking
It's a
questions.
very short little
Okay, do
section.
let's do it. Go for it.
Okay. So quickly, let's wrap up here. We've already talked on a lot of the four domains throughout the conversation, but I'll just clarify and kind of
Okay.
overview what we've talked about, how art making can be helpful in the four domains
Yes,
for
yes,
all people,
yes. Bring it
regardless
to
of
summary.
skill. Yeah.
Summarize it. Yeah.
So first, in mind, we've talked a lot about mind, so I don't really need to go over that very much more. But making things that are internal, external, so that they can be seen. Making things that are external,
Uh,
internal, so that they
but
can be changed.
so be seen so they can be processed and
Yes.
addressed. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yes.
And they can come to new perspectives, new wisdom, new
Yep.
insight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so the question is if we think about this in spirit, in our relationship with God, we take everything we just talked about in account, how beautiful would it be to incorporate some of these things into our relationship with God? I mean, in Psalm 139, 23, and 24, David says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." What if we were to create art asking God, "God, reveal to me the state of my heart," and make art and ask God to give us impression of what we just created, to make ourselves vulnerable. You said disrobing emotionally
Mm-hmm.
before
Mm-hmm.
God, using something as vulnerable as art and the love and presence and safety of Him.
I like that.
Yeah.
Have you done that not as a exercise for a patient, but have you done that very thing in a church group?
That specific thing in a church group, no. I have done several I've done some variations in church groups, but not that specific thing.
Yeah.
So my reason of sharing this is something specific that our listeners can try.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why
All
I'm
right.
focusing on
Okay. All
this.
right. Good.
And then a second one that listeners can try is making an art reflection. Does not have to be good. Use a giant paintbrush, right? Of a scripture. So think about it. If you read a psalm and you were to draw or paint inspiration from that psalm, you are meditating on and only thinking about that scripture the entire time that you are creating. It's so hard to just sit and think or focus. Our mind wanders. But if we're creating art about it, that is all that we're thinking about.
Yeah, it's nice. I like it.
And so that's a good way to meditate on scripture. Um, and so moving forward to relational. So collaborative art making. This can be something simple like teamwork, right? Sharing ideas, collaborating. And one of the benefits of collaborative art making or art making with people you're in relationship with is the art itself is relatively non-consequential. So you can take more risks. You can try new things. Very brief anecdote. I did a group art therapy where I had people make a sculpture together. And in reflection, multiple people said that they experimented with playing a different role in the group dynamic than they normally play because of how non-consequential the art itself was. People who normally take lead took a step back. People who normally fall back took lead, and it worked. And then they said, now I feel empowered to apply this to other settings.
Nice.
And then in the body, right? So we've talked about a little bit about some of kind of the neurological things, but one of the things with art making is that it can send somebody into a flow state. I don't know if you're familiar with flow states.
Alpha wave, alpha brainwave.
Oh, well,
That what you mean by
that's
flow
getting to
state?
the limitations of my
Okay,
knowledge
what do you
of
mean
flow
by flow
states.
state? And I'll tell you.
But a flow state basically is a
state of focus where time doesn't.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, that's alpha activity in the brain. This is where all athletes want to get. They get in the zone, what they call the zone.
Calms the sympathetic nervous system, decreases inflammation, which we've talked about can do all sorts of health benefits. And so art and crafts is a great way to do that, especially if somebody is struggles to get there or has never been even. Maybe their nervous system has been so activated their whole life that they don't know what it's like to be alert and calm at the same time.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
art
good.
making can actually experientially bring your system, your body into that state, which can be strengthened and repeated in other settings.
Anything you want to? I mean, I think that was a great summary of all that we've talked about. Anything you want to say in closing as we wrap up our 2 sections on art?
Yeah, I just would like to encourage people to think about what lies they've believed about themselves, their ability to engage with these things. This is not something that's cut off from you that you're not allowed to access because, somebody at some point told you couldn't. This is something that's available to everybody. Seek an art therapist if you don't want to do it on your own, or attend an art class if you want to, right? Just try it. It's low consequential. You can throw it away at the end and say, I'm never going to try that again. Just try it and see what happens.
Daniel, I have enjoyed these 2 talks. I have learned from you, and I love learning new stuff, and I just really appreciate all that you've brought. Well, who knows? We may do another show in the future on it because I think there's a lot more richness here to dig into.
There's still so much more. Yes,
I think there is. So we may come back and visit this again in the future.
Sure.
But thanks for bringing your examples in and your book and just sharing your perspective on this. I'm going to be thinking more about how I can include art into treatment with our patients. So thank you for that. Yeah. And I hope you found these 2 shows beneficial. Thanks for joining us today. And if you have questions, send them into questions@designformore.net, questions@designformore.net, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on Designed for More, brought to you by Come and Reason Ministries and Honey Lake Clinic. Also, don't forget to check out our other podcasts for more inspiring content.